Senate Bill 1 states unequivocally, revisions to the content standards shall focus on critical knowledge, result in more in-depth standards, facilitate mastery, communicate expectations more clearly, and be based on evidence-based research. Kentucky's proposed social studies standards for the next generation fail summarily to meet any of these requirements. I will attempt in 3 minutes to proffer my concerns, but I challenge you to extend that by questioning me afterward. That sounds like that's out of date, especially given the over 3 hours devoted previously to Dr. Monica Martinez and the so-called deeper learning model upon which these and other standards are ostensibly predicated. As a pre-service teacher years ago, I learned, and later as a college assessment instructor, I taught that best practice is to plan assessments before instruction. Discussion of state assessments is forbidden in the networks, and other than the laughable resurrection of the 25-year-old failed purist model, none seem to be in the pipeline. Proponents in the department have set up an easily attacked straw man with their talk of jeopardy, memorization of dates, and acquisition of isolated facts. Good social studies teachers moved from that model long ago and should be offended by the implication. What must stop is the incessant, elite-sounding, edgy jargon that relies almost exclusively upon the inquiry, project-based, student-led discovery learning approach espoused by C3, deeper learning, and now even codified in the exemplary column of PGES. One thing Dr. Martinez, Dr. McGrath, and Charlotte Danielson all have in common is their lack of experience teaching in the very schools they purport expertise in. Research overwhelmingly supports the effectiveness of teacher as activator over teacher as facilitator. I gladly accept the appellation accomplished, and wear as a badge of honor the moniker sage on the stage. Indeed, I challenge each of you now to think back to the classroom teacher you most admired and learned from. Was that teacher merely a guide on the side who faded into the background, as Dr. Martinez prefers, or did she take charge of the classroom, model for you, and engage you in compelling and captivating activities from which you gained valuable knowledge and thinking skills? Be honest now. Who was it? Which one of these does she fit? I trust you're aware that 5 of the 8 schools touted as models in deeper learning have now experienced declining test scores, as well as loss of percentile ranking with their in-enrollment states. The inquiry model is a tool in any good educator's toolbox, but it can't be the only one. As a parting challenge, imagine you're an immigrant from a foreign land, desirous of gaining citizenship in this great country, but all you have to guide you toward passing the U.S. citizenship test is Kentucky's C3-based standards. Of the 50 social studies specific vocabulary words required for the test, 44 are nowhere to be found, including such obscure words as Congress, flag, senator, elect, president, vote, independence, and even the word America. These words are in our current standards, which, by the way, are far more compliant with Senate Bill 1 than their proposed replacement. I respectfully request time at your next meeting to offer detailed and research-based support for my position. I won't need 3 hours, but in the interest of fairness and thoughtful dialogue, 30 minutes might be in order. I want to thank Dr. Holliday for his past service. I want to thank you all for your service, and welcome aboard Dr. Pruitt. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, well, Donnie, that was a good presentation during the board's formal session. I'm now talking with Donnie Wilkerson in a private one-on-one conversation about the problem with the social studies standards revisions, which have been proposed back in October of 2014 and were rightly criticized as being devoid of any history content. Donnie, you're the Kentucky History Teacher of the Year for 2011, right?
That's correct. That's correct. I felt it was important today to maybe not dwell on the problems with the standards as we did last October. It's been exactly a year when I was here before, and at that time we spoke about how the failed process of the standards developed. I didn't think it was a good idea to belabor that point today. We're too far gone with that. So I just wanted to point out some of the real fallacies, and probably the biggest one is just identifying the non-compliance with Senate Bill 1. I mean, if you look at the key words in the bill, none of them are met by this so-called standards.
Okay, let's expand on that a little bit, because I've read Senate Bill 1 as well, and I agree with you. Now, Senate Bill 1 specifically calls for content standards.
It says content in the wording. It also used the word mastery. It uses the word knowledge. and it uses the word, in addition to mastery and knowledge, it uses the word clearly. Clearly. And certainly these are the most ambiguous set of standards. And I don't take issue with some of the lofty goals that are included. It's not about that. We're not setting a pedagogical goal for teachers. We're supposed to have a set of standards by which they know what should be taught, and more importantly, what should be learned. What are the expectations for learning for the students in that particular grade? We don't have that.
And we don't. And I'll put in one additional thing that I know is on teachers' minds, even though they probably wouldn't mention it first, and that is you have to know something from the standards about what's going to be on the assessments, or you can't prepare kids for that.
That was a key point that I made today. I learned several years, it's been 12 years ago now, as a pre-service teacher, that before you ever design or plan any instruction, you should first design your assessment, so you know what kind of standards you're going to hold the students to at the end of your work. So, and then for the last several years, I'm on sabbatical now, but for the last several years, I've taught assessment at the college level. And again, one of the things that I taught my pre-service teachers, now as their instructor, was to make sure you design your assessment first. Well, the state is just the opposite. In fact, we're forbidden. If we bring up the word assessment or state accountability at one of our network meetings, we get shut down. I mean, we can't, let's don't talk about that. We'll talk about that some other time. But you can't do that. We have to know how it's going to be assessed before we can design the instruction. Now, they disagree because it's all about this thing called project-based learning. The new buzzword is deeper learning. The state board spent 3 hours at their June meeting allowing... Actually, they even read the book in advance and brought the author in, and she's a fine lady, great lady. But what she's espousing are non-research-based strategies. Project-based, problem-based learning is a tool in your toolbox, not the only one.
You know, let's talk about that for a second. Doesn't federal law require that the assessment used for accountability have to be research-based?
Oh, absolutely. And so does Senate Bill 1. Senate Bill 1 says clearly it has to be evidence-based, research-based. And project-based learning, there's one study, and she cites it in her book, and it's very marginal. It's based on a high school study in California that justifies the whole concept of project-based learning. If you look at John Hattie's exhaustive 900 meta-analysis, he clearly shows that strong teacher-led classrooms are far superior to the so-called constructivist, student-led, guide-on-the-side approach. I really would like to ask those board members today who they came up with in their mind when I challenged them to think of a teacher that they had throughout their career. What was a teacher that impacted you? What kind of teacher was that? Was it a guide on the side who tried to fade into the background as the PBL people want? Or was it a strong, dynamic, standing in front of the students, getting involved, the students doing great activities, involved in the classroom, moving around, doing great things, but that teacher was still in charge? Those are the people that come to mind for most
Teacher
people.
was the sage on the stage. Now, I've been getting questions about this idea of the guide on the side versus sage on the stage.
Yes.
There's a lot being written about it, but the facts of life are that one of the most extensive research projects ever done on education in this country was a series of projects under the title Project Follow-Through.
Yes.
It started in the Johnson era, and one of the major findings that came out of that series of research was that especially for the disadvantaged kids that they were talking about this morning, these are the gap kids that we're talking about, the minorities, the kids with learning disabilities, English language learners, and kids in poverty, that they need a structure in their classroom. And they found in this extensive research years ago, that still pertains today, that the most effective way to teach these types of kids is with the sage on the stage, a direct instruction type approach. That doesn't mean that there isn't a place for some creativity and a project or two, but the problem with project learning in my mind is that because with project learning, you don't know what the kids are actually going to learn, that there may be some important key concepts that never get covered. It's too disjointed.
Yeah, it is disjointed, and the project itself may have value, and it would be wonderful. But again, it's an allocation of the value of the time you have with those students, and can you accomplish what needs to be accomplished with that project? The research does not bear that out, and we have to look at the numbers and the facts. But what some of the key folks at KDE have done, and in the networks, they've created what I call a straw man. They want to paint social studies teachers across the state, and I agree, there are some guilty of this. They want to paint the average social studies teacher as one who stands and reads the chapter, stands at the front of the podium and reads the chapter, and then answers the question and has his test at the end of the day. That's a horrible problem. That's not direct instruction. That's not explicit instruction.
It's just bad instruction.
That's bad instruction. If we have bad teachers out there, let's do something about that. But we can't fix bad teachers with a social studies standard.
No, standards will not improve teachers at all. It'll tell them what to do, but if they don't know how to do it, it doesn't happen. Standards are not the curriculum.
I'd be willing to be the first as a teacher to say that we need tougher standards on teachers. We need tougher entry level to get into teacher ed programs. And then, if we look at the Norwegian model, for example, teachers there are put on a pedestal, but there's 100 apply for 3 jobs. I mean, it's
very competitive.
It's very competitive.
Yeah. You know, here in this country, I'm told, especially at the elementary school level, that candidates in our colleges to go into elementary teaching have the lowest average ACT scores of any school on the campus. You know, the science schools and English department, all of those have higher ACTs. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I misspoke there when I said 100 jobs. I didn't mean 100 jobs. I mean 100 applicants for the position at the ed school. That's where we have to do the delineation, and then you're going to get people from the top echelons of the ranking rather than the bottom echelons of the ranking. And I'm a teacher, and I can say that. I can be self-deprecating and say yes, but the reason for that is because there's a salary gap out there, but we can't have one without the other. All I'm saying is the social studies standards, or the science standards for that matter, should not be a teacher training device. That's not how you train teachers to teach. They are standards, and they're 2 different commodities. And Senate Bill 1 does not call for a set of pedagogical guidelines for teaching. It calls for a set of clear, content, knowledge-based, evidence-based standards. It's clear. And if this passes as it is, and I had this in my presentation, but you have to limit to 3 minutes, so I had to nix some things. But if this is passed, if it clears the board,
well, now we're talking about the proposed changes, social studies standards.
If it's adopted as is and doesn't change, now they may possibly bring in those curriculum documents that they have now. Those curriculum documents could be added, and if they codified those, then maybe it would skirt through a legal challenge. But if that's not done and it stands as written, there will be a court challenge, I'm assured, and there's no question any logical-minded court would have to throw them out summarily.
Now, this situation, as you pointed out a little earlier when we were talking, this started brewing a full year ago when we first took a look at the proposed standards at the October 2014 board meeting.
Yes.
And about 6 months later, the department floated a change in their website, which you and I have talked about before, appears to have only minor cosmetic changes from what was floated back in October of 2014 And that's still the current working version, right?
It is the current working version, and some of the changes are so minor. Just flipping a sentence around, and they counted that as a change. I can't cite one off, but I could print you the changes. Now, a couple of substantive changes. The word Constitution was actually put back in to the 5th grade standards. I will give them that. That's the only thing, though, that was substantive.
Oh my! That's it. You know, another thing is this document now I think is about 45 pages total, and that includes the cover and the back page. But in a sense, the way they present the standards, they're printed in duplicate in 2 different methods.
Correct.
But it's basically only about a 22-page document, give or take, to cover the entire kindergarten through 12th grade social study. Is that? Am I correct? Is that right?
You are correct, and I always try to play the devil's advocate. The proponents at KDE will say, well, Senate Bill 1 calls for fewer standards, and they're correct, but it does say fewer and clearer standards. We have fewer, but muddier.
Well, I'm not sure we have any standards. I think what we have are vague statements.
They are vague statements. They are vague statements.
I don't know.
They're not standards.
I don't know when children are going to ever learn about any of the major wars. The American Revolution is not included anymore. Civil War is gone. World War I and World War II aren't mentioned at all. Vietnam's not mentioned, and neither is the Persian Gulf War.
You and I both stayed around for the budgetary process, and you've heard the discussion about assessment funding. and they were bantering about very minor numbers, $2 million for science and $1 million for social studies. Quite frankly, they have no idea how to assess these things. The only trial balloon that's been floated is the old Kiris model from 1992, which was an unmitigated disaster and a failure, and they know that. But the lady that spoke to them in June, part of her handout had in it the Kiris information from 1992. Believe it or not, 25 years old.
Oh, I believe it because I've written about this.
Yeah.
And, you know,
unreal.
The stuff they're talking about, and by the way, some of these pedagogical ideas, these instructional approaches that we're talking about now, are almost word for word extractions of a 1993 document from the Department of Education called Transformations, Kentucky's Curriculum Framework. And it sounds exactly the same as this 93 document.
Because there is a base of folks out there. It's called, and there's just argument, and there are people on both sides that I value and think a lot of. But there's two sides. It's just like kind of Republican and Democrat. There's this group of educators that believe in what's called the constructivist guide on the side approach, and then there's this explicit instruction group, this direct instruction, sage on the stage, which I happen to be part of. But if you came to my classroom, you probably wouldn't think that, because we're down on the floor, we're standing on our desk, we're doing crazy stuff all the time. But I'm still running the show, you know. So, but here's the real thing, and I think this is the hidden agenda that you might not realize. If these standards are adopted and the science standards are left alone, there's so much trouble to assess. They even mentioned this today. What might happen is they might say, hey, we don't have to. Now we've got the new authorization of ESEA. Doesn't say anything about science or social studies.
Actually, I think the science may be. Right now, science is still included, but social studies is
probably not going to make the cut.
No.
So what's going to be the easy thing for the states now is say, we'll just let the districts do that. They can have some formative, you heard that mentioned today, 3 formative assessment models. Well, that has failed for writing portfolios. It's failed for program reviews, and it's failed for PGES. You can't ask districts to grade themselves.
You can't ask districts to grade themselves if it's going to be in accountability.
If it's going to be accountability. Now, I have no problem if we're going to move it out of accountability. Let's be honest and say that's where we're headed. This is all a smokescreen, so we can get rid of social studies. You know, I work in a great district. I work in a great district in a great school. I have a wonderful superintendent, a wonderful principal. We'll keep right on teaching social studies, whether the state tells us to or not. But there are places around the country and around the state that will just drop it, carte blanche, if it's not assessed.
And if anybody doubts that, you know, right now in this state, I've been told by college professors at 2 of our 4-year university science departments, we have 30 school districts in Kentucky that do not offer high school physics. Why? It's not required under next generation science standards.
It's not required.
It's not required.
Yeah. So that's a
whole. So those kids are locked out of any opportunity to go to a STEM career.
And that's a whole other argument. And I actually come from the side that believes we don't need all these assessments. Again, if you look at the Norwegian model, they don't do national assessment because they build in such a strong teacher network. It's not necessary.
Their teachers don't have to be told or shown. They already know.
No, we know they know what to do. It's the same way we don't test. You know, doctors. The doctors to be held, you know, doctors and lawyers, but they have such a rigorous entry exam, such a rigorous educational process. If we created that same thing for teachers, this problem would go away. But that's a whole other argument. What we're looking at here is are these standards, do these standards meet Senate Bill 1? They don't.
So you're thinking, I think we probably need to close. So your thinking is that if this proposal that was floated in October that has been little changed in the current proposal, which was published in March of 2015, if that goes through, that we are probably looking at a lawsuit and these will be thrown out because they are a violation of Senate Bill 1.
I think you will see that. I don't know that anybody's willing to do that. Certainly, I'm a lowly social studies teacher with lots of debt. I certainly can't take on that challenge and would not do that. If someone wants to fund it, maybe. But I have to deal. My main focus is my kids in my classroom. I love them and I want to work with them. So probably I won't do that, but I can guarantee you somebody will because it's so blatantly off. But having that not said, what will happen is the state will just stop testing social studies. That's what's going to happen with this. That's where they're headed. They're going to turn it over to the districts, and then it'll depend on the district. Our district will continue to do it. Some will.
And our kids will suffer.
Yeah.
They won't learn how to be good citizens. They won't
exactly
learn
right.
economics.
Yeah.
They won't learn history behind where we got to where we are today, which is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, to understand the good things so we don't throw babies out of the bathwater, but also to understand we didn't do everything right.
So
we need to fix this. It's still a problem.
Yeah.
How did we get where we are today? And if you don't know where you are as a navigation rule going forward, you can't set a course for the future.
That's exactly right. I tell my students almost on a daily basis, we stop. Why are we studying this? Why are we learning about this? The answer is not because it's on the test. The answer is not because you're going to need it for next year. The answer is because we need to learn from history. We need to know what's good and keep on doing those good things and not repeat the mistakes of the past. And are we going to have a little fun with it along the way and celebrate and eat fun foods and fly flags and sing songs? Yes, but the whole purpose is so that we mirror the good things and don't do the bad things. And that's why we teach social studies, you know?
That's right. But we better have standards that help us do it right, or we can do more damage.
Or many won't do it.
Good.
That's right.
That's right.
Good intentions, but it won't turn out the way they intended.
Tony, thanks a lot. I've been talking with
sir.
Donnie Wilkerson. He's Kentucky's History Teacher of the Year from 2011. Obviously interested enough in what's going on with the social studies proposals here in Frankfurt to take his personal time off to come to talk to the State Board of Education about these problems, and hopefully they will take his comments to heart.